Excellent. Good evening. Welcome to the March meeting of the Gungahlin Community Council. My name is Peter Elford. I'm the President of the Community Council. We have a number of our executive here this evening and a few apologies from the executive. The agenda we have up before you, I'll give a short update on some of the activities we've been involved in. There's going to be a short announcement on behalf of the Ginninderra Catchment Group, and our formal presentations are from Canberra Cemeteries, and I will provide a background to our submission on draft variation 364, which sounds dreadfully technical and boring, but relates to the future of the Gungahlin Town Centre and its capacity to grow like the other town centres in Canberra. Just quickly, and before I get into sort of a recap, obviously there's a lot happening in the community at the moment around the COVID-19 coronavirus. I'm very much encouraged by the Gungahlin community in the sense that I was only unable to buy toilet paper for 2 days and have been successfully able to buy toilet paper in Gungahlin. So hopefully that level of discipline and control amongst the community will stay, and we'll get through what could be quite uncertain times over the next few weeks as a group. Look, in the past, since the February meeting, we've engaged with the Australian Federal Police Association. No, that's not the AFP, it's their staff association, about the capacity and future needs of Gungahlin's policing. Had a very good engagement with them. We hope to get them along to explain why they think there needs to be a bigger police station and more police in the Gungahlin region. We've had a couple of meetings to progress the Celebrate Gungahlin Festival. For those listening in and those here, November 7 is the Saturday, November 7 is the date you need to put in your calendar, and we continue to work with across a wide range of groups, including Northside Community Services, Communities at Work, Bernardo's, and the Gungahlin Community Council to bring that along in partnership with Belconnen Arts, who have the contract to deliver the Gungahlin Arts Program, and a lady called Michelle Grimston is leading that activity for us. Two things. So the other major activity that's taken up our time is further engagement around draft variation 364, and I'll talk about that. And we've also participated in a workshop on the future of the Franklin grasslands. If you've ever wondered what's going to happen to that huge patch of grass alongside the light rail line near Well Station Drive, the answer is nothing. It will be retained forever as a remnant site. So it's a unique piece of grassland, and I think we'll hear a bit more about what's going on with grasslands in Gungahlin shortly. As always, if you've got any feedback on tonight or on any other issues in Gungahlin, please by all means reach out to us. So I'll now ask Anne from the Ginninderra Catchment Group to say a few words, and I'll come back for a question after I've let Anne speak. Did you need me to hold something, Anne? Sorry? I can hold things as well.
Okay. We can hold those two if you like, and I'll hold that and try and speak from memory. Okay, hello, I'm Anne. I am communication volunteer for Ginninderra Catchment Group, which is an umbrella group for 19 bunches of volunteers who are doing land caring and water watch, and everyone does frog watch, land caring and water watch in this catchment. And I don't know how many of you already are in land care or water watch or anything like that. No? Okay. Well, I just want you to know that it's possible. You can join in. You can be physically caring for the environment if you want to, and all you have to do is look us up on the web or Facebook and come along to one of the land care groups in your area, wherever is handy. Where should we start? Do you know where the Ginninderra Creek runs? You do?
I do.
Right. Where does it start?
Further north.
Okay, it starts in Mulligan's Flat, and it finishes at the Murrumbidgee River, having gone all the way through this part of Gungahlin, with a number of tributaries feeding into it, and then through Belconnen, through Lake Ginninderra, and out again through McGregor, and I'll try and keep the microphone in place. Out through McGregor and out across the border, Ginninderry. You've heard of the Ginninderry development. That's pretty well at the end of Ginninderra Creek as it runs into the Murrumbidgee. The nitrogen and the creatures that live in the creek, because if they're healthy, then the creek is healthy. So that's the water watch. And then there's frog watch. Every October, every spring, hundreds of people in this area go out and listen to frogs and record them on their phones and upload the information, and then the frog watch coordinator can tell by listening to the different calls of each species how many of each species there are in all this region, and that tells us whether the frog environment is healthy, and that's really an indication of the whole environment. Now, frog watch is run from the Ginninderra Catchment Group office. The water watch area of this area is run from the Ginninderra Catchment Group office, and all the land care groups are supported by the Ginninderra Catchment Group office. So it's a useful thing to know about. We have a website and we have a Facebook page which has only recently been set up, and you're very welcome to come and see people at the office as well, which is at Kippax Shops in Holt. I know it's a fair way from here, but it's, hey, it's Canberra. We can drive 50k to do anything. So, I don't know, would anyone like to ask any questions?
I'll just ask one. When you mentioned weed control, I've detected 5 different types of weed just in this area. There's African mudgrass, there's Bathurst bird, there's skeleton weed, there's St John's wort, Patterson's curse.
Yep.
And how do you, some you should dig out and actually burn, like Bathurst bird. Others you can spray. But what's your process for handling these sorts of
in fact, when I say weed control, very often we focus on the woody weeds, so the things you can cut down, the shrubs. But for African lovegrass, different groups have different ways of doing it. Some groups will go along with a pick and dig it out. A lot of us will go along with a pair of scissors and a bag and we'll cut off the seeds, because if you can get rid of the seeds, you can really cut down the population spread, but although it's got away now. St John's wort is a problem, generally has to be sprayed, and has to be sprayed in about September, because otherwise the seeds will set anyway. And you have to have a ChemCert training and Chem certification to do spraying, even in land care groups, which are volunteers. So you can say, yes, I want to do a ChemCert course, and you'll be paid for to go and do it. Same with chainsawing and all that sort of stuff. What else did you mention? Skeleton weed, that's a dig-out job. Yes, really, in a way, you don't have to belong to a land care group to just start taking care of the patch that you live in or you walk through. There is a little bit of a There might be some rules about doing it on the roadsides because of OH&S, and if TCCS or the government sees you, you might well be in trouble, I think, there. So, you have to be careful. Maybe just if you're walking in a park and you see some African lovegrass, I'm sure nobody's going to care two hoots if you have a bag and you cut off the seeds and all the seeds you can see. Do you all know what African lovegrass looks like? It's that misty, furry stuff you can see on all the roadsides at the moment, standing about this high, bright green. And when you get close, you'll find that the seeds are grey and very pretty, I think. I think that's why it's called lovegrass. But it's a terrible invader, and it's no good for stock unless it's very young. So it's really not very good for anything. It's just taking over the land and suppressing the native vegetation that could be there and could be, like in Franklin Grassland, which has got kangaroo grass. It's got Ginninderra peppercress, which is a very, very rare plant. It's got grassland earless dragon, striped legless lizard. What else? The sun moth, yes. So, the more patches of good native vegetation we have, the healthier our fauna, our insect fauna, our lizards, our birds, everything. I do encourage you to try and think of maybe having a look at the stuff that I've left, or looking at the website or the Facebook page and join your local group. Can I stop now?
Yeah,
thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you. The land care groups are a construct of the ACT government. They're a really good way of getting community groups involved in any patch of land, and there's a whole bunch of projects around that, so that's a good thing to Google as well. Sorry, you had a question, sir?
Oh, when you were given the update, I wondered if you had any further information about the movies.
The cinema? So I spoke briefly to Lockbridge, which are the company that front ends a number of the developers there. Their development application for the new site, now you should be familiar, I hope, that the cinema development now has an operator called United Cinemas. It's going to be a standalone building for a cinema, and there'll be a separate building which will have retail on the bottom and office space up top. That's where defence housing are going to be, on the side across the road from wherever we are, that way. And so the DA has went out to public, has been issued, it's been out to public notification, and the proponents are now working with the planning department to get final approval. So it's
You haven't heard anything since the development application's closed?
no. But that, for the record, that's not unusual. I can see some other members of the development community here who are in the same boat, where they've lodged the DA, they've got the comments back, and now they're working with the planning department to get the DA approved, consistent with whatever the planning department wants to see and what may have come out of the representations. I have never seen anyone predict how long that will take to within any degree of accuracy. So it's very hard to know how long that'll take. I think the difference between where we are now and where we've been for the last 3 years, things are actually moving forward, as opposed to the last 3 years where it was stuck in legal stuff, so it wasn't going anywhere. So, yep.
Are comments still able to be made on the LDA for that?
For the development application, no, they've been closed for some time. They didn't get a lot of responses to the DA. I think kind of less than 20, so which is pretty small. All right, we'll move on with the agenda. So our next speaker today is Cara from who's the interim CEO of Canberra Cemeteries. Somewhat of a surprise to me, when you get approached saying, "Look, we'd like to talk about some things that are going on in our world." It's like, of course, that's something that's part of our community, and we're well aware of down the road here in Mitchell. So, without further ado, I'll get Cara to come up, and I'll get the slides up.
I'm actually starting first. I'm Linda Edison. I'm the Deputy Chair of Canberra Cemeteries. So Canberra Cemeteries is an ACT statutory authority. We're in the TCCS portfolio. Some of you might know we operate 3 cemeteries currently in the ACT, so one at Hall, one at Gungahlin and one at Woden. And we're in the pre-consultation phase with various groups, including yourselves, because the government last October announced that we'll be able to establish a crematorium. and we're establishing the crematorium at the Gungahlin Cemetery. So there will be a formal DA process, and the normal consultation will apply around the DA process. But as I said, we're in the pre-consultation phase at the moment. So we've been meeting with, religious groups and different groups that have an interest in this development. And so obviously you're a group that thought we might have some interest in it, given your interest in the Gungahlin region, and of course the Gungahlin Cemetery is where we're going to put the crematorium. So Cara is our CEO, and she's going to take you through an overview of what we're doing and what the crematorium project's about. And then we're able to take some questions if you're interested. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks to Peter and the Gungahlin Community Council for the opportunity to be here this evening and to talk a bit about Canberra cemeteries in general for those of you who aren't familiar with where we fit into the scheme of things and the range of services that we do and don't provide. I think that's a good way to set a foundation and then drill down a little bit more into the crematorium itself. So the things that we'll focus on today have been outlined. In terms of the relationship that we have with the ACT government, so we're a statutory authority of the Territory Government, and our trading name is Canberra Cemeteries, but formally we are the ACT Public Cemeteries Authority, and as Linda outlined, we have a board, and Linda is one of our board members. We currently have 3 cemeteries in our portfolio: Gungahlin, Woden and Hall. So the Gungahlin Cemetery is our most active cemetery. The Hall Cemetery, which some of you might be familiar with, is quite a small, almost pioneer style cemetery. It's very beautiful. It has some protected species, so we're not further developing. Yes, absolutely, which you would know about. So we're not further developing the Hall Cemetery beyond the footprint that's already there. The Woden Cemetery is a more traditional style cemetery and has a range of different services, but it's very close to capacity in terms of not having any more area there, whereas Gungahlin has a little bit of room, so in terms of room to grow and expand. So who are we? We're a very small and dedicated team, really focused on providing service to the community, and as you can imagine, the people that we're dealing with who come into customer service and come for the burials and cremation memorialisation services are people who are in a very difficult time of their life. They're in the midst of grief, having lost someone that they care a lot about. So compassion is really important in everything that we do. And our customer service staff there are working tirelessly to support the community in all their needs. So we have a range of administrative staff as well, but our main presence is in terms of our customer service staff and in terms of our operational staff outdoors, our grounds team that are performing the burials on a daily basis. We also have horticulturalists and arborists that work on the extensive grounds that we have to maintain them, ensure that the environment is maintained to a really high standard. In terms of the potential future development for the crematorium, so this is sort of a zoom in on the Gungahlin Cemetery, which is in Mitchell on Sandford Street, so possibly you're familiar with that location. So there's also another presence on Sandford Street, Norwood Park, which is the privately operated crematorium, which is across the road from the Gungahlin Cemetery. So 2 separate entities. Sometimes people think we're all the same thing, but we're not. So this is a zoom in on the central precinct of Gungahlin Cemetery. So we're here every day in our administration building, and that's where all of our customer service functions operate from. We also have a memorial hall, which is number 3 there, which is a multi-purpose community venue that can also be used for funeral services and wakes after burials, etc. And we also have the proposed site of the crematorium, which is indicated here by the number 6, subject to surveying, etc. But that is the proposed location of the crematorium. So you can see Gungahlin Drive running up the back there, just in terms of orienting, and then Sandford Street is down here. The crematorium itself is proposed to be approximately 300 metres squared in terms of its footprint. So it's a fairly small facility really in the scheme of things within the larger context of the Gungahlin Cemetery overall, but firmly positioned within that central precinct and away from the areas that visitors would generally be accessing that are existing burial areas, etc. So there's a bit of a difference between those areas. In terms of cremation itself, and I promise I won't go too much into the process of it, but just so that there's a better understanding about how the facility actually needs to operate. Now this is obviously not our proposed design, this is just a standard kind of design of a crematorium. So usually we would have an area where funeral directors can access the crematorium to deliver coffins and then to collect the ashes or the cremated remains, which is a term used interchangeably. And within the crematorium itself, usually there's a cold storage facility, the cremator equipment, that's all back of house, and it's really quite an almost industrial area. The point of difference for the crematorium that we're designing in comparison to some other crematoria in the ACT in Australia is the viewing room. So this customer viewing room area and public amenity facility as well. So that's in response to a range of consultation which has been undertaken by the ACT government over a number of years before my time with Canberra Cemeteries, and also the consultation that we have done has confirmed that there is a community need for the viewing room, particularly for some faiths and cultures. So the Hindu, Buddhist, Jain and Sikh communities have a cultural requirement to actually view or witness, sometimes it's called a witness facility, to view or witness that cremation. And some of those faiths and cultures also have particular rituals and practices that they prefer to do immediately before the cremation. So by providing that facility, inclusive of the viewing room, we'll be meeting that currently unmet need for those particular cultural groups. I think it's important to also point out that any family can choose to view a cremation, or should have the option to be able to do that, and that's what this facility would provide as well. So it's a difficult choice for people sometimes as to whether they want to do that or not, but there are some people who think that it can provide people with a little bit more closure around the process of grieving and saying goodbye to their loved ones. So essentially that's the crematorium facility itself. And there's lots of technical specifications in terms of the equipment, which I know a little bit about. I'm not a technical expert, but certainly there have been incredible technological advances, particularly in recent years, in terms of the equipment that's utilised for cremation, which certainly is a positive thing for energy efficiency and all those kinds of elements as well. In terms of the design principles behind the crematorium, we're really focused on the ethos and the aesthetic of Gungahlin Cemetery itself. So it's an Australian bushland native garden setting at Gungahlin. So certainly the design of the building will be sympathetic to that environment, and environmental sustainability is an important thing for us in all of our operations, and will also be an important driver behind the crematorium development. But as I was saying earlier, in terms of the viewing room, but also in terms of the operating model for the crematorium, meeting those community needs specific to faith and culture is a key priority for the crematorium, and the consistency to the space and the interoperability with the other facilities as well. So in terms of the demand and the location, there might be some people who are potentially wondering, why do we need a public crematorium? And why do we need it at Gungahlin Cemetery? So the ACT has only the one private crematorium at the moment that I mentioned earlier, and that's to serve a population, as you would know, the population of the ACT, approximately 425. So the population's growing, demographics are changing, and we need to be able to respond to that. Interestingly, the ACT's current cremation rate is a little bit higher than New South Wales as a comparison. in comparison to the death rate. So there's approximately 75% cremation rate in the ACT. So not only do we not have enough cremators for the population, we also favour cremation, and that will probably be a trend that will continue. So it's definitely an unmet need in terms of providing the crematorium, an additional crematorium. I mentioned the faith and cultural elements earlier with regards to the viewing room, so certainly there's some unmet specific community needs. And in terms of our portfolio of cemeteries, Gungahlin Cemetery is the only location as a cemetery that is suitable for that crematorium. That's due to a variety of reasons. There is a proposal for Southern Memorial Park, which you might have heard about over the recent years, and that's down in the Tuggeranong area. Now we are in the stage now of working with the ACT government in terms of developing a revised master plan for that proposal, and that's to look at having grave stock and cremation memorialisation stock for Canberra for the next 100 years. That's a really long-term project, and because we're still in those planning stages and revising the master plan, it wouldn't really have been appropriate for us to press pause and develop a crematorium down there. That might happen in the future, might happen in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. We don't know that until the outcome of that master plan, but certainly there's a current unmet need now, and that's why the decision's been taken to have the crematorium located at Gungahlin. And as I've outlined, there's been consultation undertaken by the ACT government and confirmed by our recent community consultation as well with regards to meeting those community needs. Traffic. There might be a concern around traffic for some people in terms of increased activation of the area around Sanford Street and Mitchell particularly, but we're not anticipating huge increase in volume of traffic for the crematorium itself, but as the population increases and cremation rates increase, people are visiting the cemetery for more burials even. There is the chance that we'll have an increase in traffic, and we've already started looking at some mitigation measures for that, but certainly we're open to receiving feedback or concerns around traffic management, and there are formal mechanisms to convey those as well through Access Canberra. Community consultations. So we're undertaking a range of community consultation activities associated with the work that we do at Canberra Cemeteries overall, and then specifically with the public crematorium. So given the range of faith and cultures that I've outlined that would access the viewing room specifically in terms of the crematorium, so we've consulted through the Hindu temple with the Buddhist, Sikh and Hindu communities. Most recently we engaged with the Chinese community, as you can see from the photo there. When we get into a more detailed design phase, we'd really be sitting down with the funeral directors and looking at that design and ensuring that it's operationally going to meet their needs. And they would be then speaking on behalf of some of the families they've worked with. And we'll also be doing some more specific faith and cultural consultation as well to make sure that we're really getting that design right and will accurately meet those needs. So there will of course be more formal consultation, particularly as Linda mentioned, through the development application process, and there's information on our Canberra Cemeteries website for you. We obviously have our ongoing commitment to engaging with the community and understanding their needs, so open for discussion in terms of if there are any questions about Canberra Cemeteries in general and our public crematorium. Thank you.
We'll go with clapping now. Thank you. Any questions? So, yep. So hang on, I'll grab the microphone. That way people online can hear. Thank you.
Just one question, ma'am. Hi, my name's Josh. Pleasure to meet you. Thank you very much for the presentation. Have you consulted with the Buddhist and the Christian Orthodox communities as well in relation to the crematorium?
Sure. So Christian Orthodox we haven't covered off yet. We do have planned consultation this month with the Canberra Interfaith Forum, which I'm not entirely sure if that covers the Christian Orthodox or not. I think it does, but if it doesn't, then we would reach out further. But in terms of the Buddhist, Hindu, Sikh and Jain community, the Hindu temple consultation that was convened in November covered those broader faith groups
Right, okay.
in detail. So, and we will then go back to that same group of people and expand that consultation to their congregations around that detailed design as well.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yep.
Cost.
Sorry?
The cost of using it
Sure.
as compared with the commercial premises that are operating at the moment.
Okay, so sorry, just to clarify your question, is your question with regards to the cost of the project or the cost of a cremation?
The cost of a cremation.
Sure, okay. So there is actually a process underway at the moment to ensure competitive neutrality of the Public Cemeteries Authority's cremation pricing. So our pricing hasn't been set until the ICRC, the Independent Competition and Regulatory Commission, releases their draft pricing principles, which I believe will be towards the end of this month. So we've worked on average pricing in terms of our modelling, but our comprehensive pricing model is contingent on the pricing principles from the competitive neutrality review that's underway. On average, I can give you a benchmark on average. So the cost of cremation in Australia varies quite considerably. Some of the cemeteries and crematoria will bundle it together with their chapel or whatever the case might be, and there are publicly available fees on all of the cemetery and crematoria operators' websites. I would say on average that for a cremation you could be looking at anything between $800 to $1,200, and that depends on a variety of factors. That's just for the cremation component. Some facilities will charge for other elements of the cremation or the viewing room, etc. And obviously, as I said, we're still working all of that out through our competitive neutrality process with the Commission. In terms of burial is always a lot more expensive than cremation, and that's just a fact. So your average burial for lawn graves, which is the most popular choice for the majority of people, would be anything between $8,000 to $12,000, and that's speaking broadly. I'm not just talking about Canberra cemeteries. I'm also involved with some cemeteries in New South Wales, so I've got their prices as a comparison point as well. So one
thing we should probably explain, because we're an ACT authority, the cemeteries have always had the price set by government. So when it comes to the burial prices we have here in the ACT, we have a review process for our prices. So we've always had a process of doing a calculation for our prices, which then the Minister endorses. So one of the things about our cemeteries which are unique is you're buried in perpetuity. So some of you might not understand that in the ACT, the only place you can own a land is in our cemeteries, and then when you own it in perpetuity, forever. So when we set our prices in the ACT, we're actually setting prices for you to be able to be interred in the cemetery, and then the cemetery maintained and that area maintained in perpetuity. And because we have that particular model, then the price setting regime needs to be done. It has a lot of actuarial analysis involved in it, because the pricing factors in the maintenance of the graves in perpetuity. So as Cara said, so private sector authorities or private sector entities that operate crematorium and cemeteries will have a different way of pricing, but we have a pricing method which involves the actuarial advice. We have a formal review process every 5 years, a public review process, but in between that we update our prices based on cost and CPI, etc., and that goes to the Minister every year to do the approval. Because what we do in our pricing is we actually have trust accounts. So in order to be able to maintain the funds, to maintain the cemetery in perpetuity, we have accounts for each cemetery, which is a trust fund for each cemetery, which is where the money goes in order to be able to do it in perpetuity. So we have to calculate all of that, and then the Minister signs off on the pricing. And when the government approved the crematorium, the competitive neutrality rules meant that they wanted to make sure that there wasn't an advantage. So it comes out of those arrangements, and so that's why the government asked the ICRC to do a review, which is currently ongoing at the moment. They've called for public submissions as part of setting our price, and we've put a submission which is available on their website, as with other organisations that have made submissions to that review. Yep.
Not simple. Yeah.
Can I buy a cremation in advance? Yes or no?
I can't speak for the private operator in the ACT, so we aren't currently selling cremation certificates yet because we don't have the crematorium. Once the crematorium is operational, you would be able to do that through Canberra cemeteries, and in other crematoria around Australia there's a range of different options that they have. Most of them would offer you the chance to buy that cremation deed in advance. And a lot of people would be encouraged to do that as part of planning ahead. So say, for example, if people are organising their will, then they might then organise their final wishes and confirm their final wishes by purchasing that cremation deed. You can also do that with burial as well, so purchase that burial ahead of time. And a lot of people choose to do that, which is a sensible thing to do. So I would encourage everyone to consider planning ahead in that regard.
Stick with you for just one more.
What is the cost of building the crematorium?
Sure. So our anticipated project cost is a maximum of $2.5 million for the crematorium. As you can imagine, the equipment is fairly expensive and quite bespoke equipment. Yep.
All right, we have a question from the online community.
It's just a comment, actually, not a question. But the Christian Orthodox are not using the crematorium. It's against our religion.
Oh.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you.
Yep, sorry.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's been very informative. Does the ACT have any other more economical and better environmental options at all?
Oh yes, so we have at Gungahlin, we have the natural burial ground. So we established the natural burial ground a few years ago, and in fact if you go back to that very first shot on the slide, that's the natural burial ground. So you're able to reserve a space in the natural, that's it. So where you see the path going through the burial ground, this is a Karapunda here. And so, so you can be interred in the natural burial ground, and the way the memorialisation occurs is there's a large sort of rock there, and people, if they choose to, they don't have to, they put sort of a little plaque there, and we use a GPS locator to know where people are within that burial ground, and then consistent with that being a natural burial ground, then you would use a sort of a consistent way of having the body contained to be interred in that ground. Yep. So you can get put in the ground, put a tree on top, and do some good. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's not the same cost. You don't own that plot like the other. You don't own that plot like the other example.
Your space there is all the ground here is maintained in perpetuity for you.
Okay.
So natural burial is forever.
Okay. Just trying to get the microphone right.
Yeah, and I know we were talking about cost earlier, so I'm not sure. Sometimes I'm paying too much attention here. What's the cost of burial is the question.
The cost of burial? Yes, so I was using lawn graves as an example in response to an earlier question about cost of burial, and was saying that the lawn graves could range from, say, $8,000 to $12,000, and that's not just talking about Canberra cemeteries, that's sort of in general. But there are a vast variety of burial options that I won't go into all the details right now, but there are lots of different options for different communities and faiths. So some people prefer to have very elaborate monuments, which obviously would be a different price point to the lawn burial. Natural burial can be a little bit of a more affordable option as well, particularly because of the environmental sustainability associated with it. So can be less costs, and again I won't go into those details, but With natural burial, I'm actually quite passionate about natural burial. I think it's a wonderful option for Canberra cemeteries and other cemeteries around the world to be providing to the community because of the environmental sustainability ethos of it. And it's certainly, the principle behind it generally is that the area should appear as completely natural as possible, which is why we have that community memorial rather than memorialising within the actual area. So it's quite a nice ethos. There's a range of different natural burial principles and philosophies around the globe and a range of different natural burial areas. So ours is our own and unique. There is also a bush garden which is adjacent to the natural burial area, and that's for when people inter or bury the ashes or cremated remains. So that's in a more environmentally aesthetic area as well.
Okay, thank you. Another question?
When you said about the natural burial ground, can you just scatter your ashes? Or not you, your relatives?
Yeah, sure. So ashes can be scattered in the natural burial area, not so much in the actual burial area itself, but in surrounding areas of the bushland, and then also in that bush garden, which is for the cremated remains or the ashes.
So that's one way of avoiding the perpetuity of $8,000 for a block.
Well, yes, so if people choose to be cremated,
Yep.
then their family can scatter the ashes. They can scatter them within
Wherever.
the cemetery, or they can scatter them in a location perhaps that has some special significance to the family.
Noting that not all faiths are on board with scattering, but that's a longer, more complicated conversation.
Yeah, I mean, look, as we were saying earlier, there are some faiths that, that cremation is the preferred or the only option really for their religion. But likewise, there are a lot of faiths that will bury, and that they have very specific requirements. And part of our commitment to understanding community needs and responding to them is to meet those faith and cultural needs. And cremation's part of that, but burial's also another part of it. So it's a balanced approach, and I'm very pleased that we're going to be able to add the cremation to the range of services that we can provide.
And perhaps I missed it. Time frame. When do you hope to have this all in place?
Thank you.
No one can tell when a DA process will finish.
Well, you know that budget is committed and a DA has been lodged, kind of thing. So.
Sure. So I anticipate that we would be submitting the development application within this financial year, and of course that then has to run its course. So the sooner that we can have the crematorium operational, the better, because as we outlined earlier, there is the unmet community need and the population's growing. Hopefully we'll be operational at the beginning of 2021, but no firm timeframes have been committed yet.
Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you very much. It's been true. Wait for it. Just a microphone.
As a statutory authority, what authority do you have if there's a rogue funeral director out there to pull them into line?
Sure, okay. That's an interesting question. So I'm pretty confident we don't have rogue funeral directors in the ACT, but if there is a big separation in terms of legislation and regulation between cemeteries and crematoria, which has its own act, and with funeral directors. So funeral directors are privately operated. We have great partnerships and relationships with the funeral directors in the ACT, and they provide a really high quality service to the community. But we have a completely separate legislative and regulatory regime.
Not their problem. So yeah. Again, thank you very much. I certainly learned a lot tonight. Really useful.
Thank you.
What we thought we'd do today is touch on a topic that's actually very long running in Gungahlin, and perhaps one of those core sleeper issues that's been around for as many as a couple of decades, and is starting to get to the point where what could happen is actually starting to happen. And I guess it's in the context of Gungahlin steadily getting to the stage where it's actually built out. And so a number of things are starting to become more obvious around, well, hang on, what have we got in our district that perhaps we should have? What don't we have in our district that perhaps we should have that are in other districts? And so we've done a bit of work to try and articulate the views of the community, consistent with what we've been talking about for a long time. And we have some concerns that some of the planning decisions being made will mean that Gungahlin ends up being a place where people sleep and don't do much else. And part of this is how the town centre is going to get built and how is land zoned. So perhaps a strong term around that we end up being a dormitory suburb, but I think some of the trends that we're seeing are something we need to at least have a conversation with amongst ourselves in the community and with the government to find joint decisions. So I'll start with a few definitions that are I think important. The first is we're talking about the Gungahlin town centre, and as you'll see in the next couple of pictures, the Gungahlin town centre is defined by the bottom, the Camilleri Way, the edge between the reserve here, Gundaroo Drive here on the west, Anthony Rolfe Drive along the north, and Manning Clark here, and does include this wetlands area, the oval, and that I've stupidly cut that corner off because it's an important part of the conversation, of course. And this is the Gungahlin town centre we know. This is, roads and buildings and stuff. But unfortunately, that's not how the ACT government necessarily sees it as part of the planning process. They tend to see it like this. So they have, I'm going to skip forward, they tend to see it like this. This is an image from the ACT territory plan, and it's colour-coded to show what sort of things can be built in certain locations. And I'm not going to give you a tutorial on the ACT territory plan because I want to go home tonight, and it's very, very complicated, and it takes a lot of reading and a lot of exposure to it for it to make any sense at all. It is also being substantially revised as we speak over the next couple of years, and the Gungahlin Community Council, along with the other community councils, are very engaged in that process. But the important things to note are colour matters a lot. Yellow, the bright yellow colour that you see here particularly, these are community use sites. So most of you are familiar with the church and the mosque and other facilities along the southern edge of the town centre, or the Gungahlin College area. Green is reserves of some form, but the really important, and most of the red colours are various forms of medium density housing, and you get kind of yellowy stuff, single dwelling housing. Dotted circly things are transport routes. You can see the light rail over here sneaking up. But really germane to this conversation are the CZ zones, which are most of the blue. Wrong button. So these dark blue sites are called CZ1, core retail sites, as it's what's described. And the other one is CZ2, which are the core commercial sites, what you and I would call an office block. And what you'll notice here, if I step back to my build, is that corner was meant to be an office park. This corner up in the far north western corner was meant to be an office park, and it ended up not being so. And I'll tell you how that kind of occurred. And you'll also notice that there's a large amount of area reserved down here currently, in the current territory plan, also that is zoned CZ2, also notionally for office space. These other colours, these light ones, are CZ5. It's another commercial retailing option. Almost all the CZs have a lower level of retail with some amount of other uses on top. CZ1 in particular usually requires an anchor retail tenant like a Myers or an Aldi or a Woolies, or usually something bigger than that actually. In fact, Phil will probably know off by heart. Well, yeah, they're right. Woolies is an anchor tenant? 1,200 square metres, yeah. And of course, for most of us, that's not a meaningful number. But okay, so the important thing is, core, officey space, and then these other spaces which are mixed retail and residential. And we're familiar with that already. We've got lots of that around. And then there are a whole bunch of use clauses and lease conditions that are attached to this, some of which will change from block to block, but mostly most CZ2 and CZ1 sites, CZ1 sites will have their own lease conditions, CZ2 mostly have similar lease conditions, and so each category has roughly similar lease conditions, and that controls what you are allowed to build on those sites. Why are there not petrol stations all over Canberra? Because there are these sort of maps that control where those sort of things go. So there's a very strict level of control in Canberra about what can go where. Now that is then overlaid with more local conditions, and this is a picture taken from the current, up until about late last year, Gungahlin Town Centre Precinct Code, which divides the town centre up into a bunch of areas and has a whole bunch of rules that apply for each precinct. So the current plan for the town centre was that this area here, which we all know to be a bunch of residential towers, was in fact meant to be an office park. And I'll talk again about why that kind of didn't happen. And then this core 1A area is the retail core, and precinct 2A is the office core. Okay, and I only draw attention. I'm not much interested in these edge bits. They're working well. It's all pretty under control. What's really interesting is these core areas, which have obviously high value, particularly now there's a light rail line down the middle of them, and the fact that this site here, which all of you know because you drive past it, is a huge amount of land, was currently planned to be an office core. So imagine the Tuggerong Office Park, where Social Security are, or Campbell Park, or something gigantic like that. So these are kind of the artefacts that drive the town centre framework, and I have seriously skimmed the top of all of these issues. So let's talk a little bit about what happened with this office park, which never ended up being an office park. Well, it nearly was an office park. So one little corner of this site was owned by a company, let's call them Geocon, and in 2015, actually that should be 2000, no, it was 2012. In 2012, prior to 2012, they bought this block of land. Sometime in 2012, they got a development approval to build an office complex on that site. So they had plans approved, ready to go to build an office space. But they didn't get a tenant. No government agency, no private entity came up to them and said, yeah, I would like to lease 7 stories of office space here alongside a tower of 12 stories with parking on site and a nearby childcare centre and some other office supporting spaces. That was, it was meant to be a small office park. A great plan, but never executed. So what did happen is that the owner of that site went away and came back with an alternative development application that requested to change the lease condition, which said you've got to build offices, to build residential. And I managed to find in my box the original brochure that was put out at the time for that proposal, which was for 3 towers called Central Park. And it's very amusing that there comes a time in every town centre's evolution that people look back on as the moment when the place changed. And I think that's very prophetic, as it turned out. So what, buried inside that precinct code I sort of referred to before, I have a hard copy here for those who are very excited to study it later. And everyone says, well, how come such tall buildings were built there? Well, inside the precinct code, under the heading height, it says the maximum height of buildings is 23 metres. And most floors are at 2.5 metres. So this is about 8 to 10 stories, roughly, ballpark. But it goes on to say, for leases granted before November 2010, this provision will not apply until 5 years from after that date, being November 2015. So what happened is the design rules changed after someone had bought the land, and they said, well, we'll give you 5 years, well, until this date. If you want to come back with a design over that, you can go over that because you bought it before that rule was in place. It's grandfathering the conditions. So that's not awful. So at least for that site, it was okay. If you'd bought the land at a certain time. So that then proceeded. Now some of you will observe that these two towers got built, that one kind of didn't. That site ended up being sold to another developer and got developed as part of a different project, but did become a tower. So just the important thing is, another important thing is I use the word rule here. There was a rule that says you can't do things. What then happened, of course, is, yep, we got those two buildings, and then we got about 8 or 9 other ones. Over here, the Mezzo project, these are the pod projects, they own that one, and they end up building the third one. This is the Lumi project, which is these two sites, and this is what became the Air Towers project. This is an early concept, it's not actually designed that way. So how on earth did these guys buy land later and still be able to build big towers over 8 to 10 stories? Well, the answer is they took the criteria from the same table in the document. There's a rule column and there's a criteria column. In the very beginning of the criteria it says the maximum height of the building will comply with compatible adjacent development. They basically said because they're about big and tall like we want to be, we'll be big and tall too. And every single one of these developments, if you looked in the DA, had about 2 sentences justifying why they were going to be over 8 to 10 stories that looked like that. And not many people lodged complaints about those developments, probably 2 or 3 per DA. The Community Council ran a bit of a campaign about this one in particular because it's immediately adjacent to residential on 2 sides, and there were 120 representations made, yet that was still approved, which we were somewhat disappointed about. So that's how it kind of happened, right? And this is how planning matters and how community engagement matters. People have got to look at these development applications and have their say about them. Otherwise, this stuff just can just happen. Now, you could argue that maybe the rules should have been applied more rigorously, but sometimes people need to be reminded that the rules need to be applied more rigorously. So we are nowhere near yet done on towers in there. They haven't finished all the build. They haven't even started getting out of the ground with these ones. And there's actually the biggest site on the whole precinct is actually in the middle, the biggest block. It's a bit hard to build on because it's a wonky shape, but that's in the middle, and we'll see how that plays out. Now, there were some community concerns, a lot of concerns about overshadowing, a lot of concerns about impact on traffic, a lot of concerns on the fact that there's all these people over here and there's no allowance for green space and how people are going to move around. And so we actually, at the time we approached Yarrabee MLA Megan Fitzharris and said, look, this is outrageous. And she said, well, have you spoke to the planning department? And I was like, fair comment. So we went and said, look, what's going wrong here? Either the way you've written the precinct code is not working, because it's clear your intention was not to have a lot of high buildings, but you've ended up with a lot of tall buildings. So either the precinct code is rubbish or your process for approving things is imperfect. And they said, okay, we'll refresh the town centre precinct code. So remember, that was in November 2016. And so they initiated the town centre planning refresh with a focus on building height and character, upgrading and enhancing public spaces, walking, cycling and road transport. And this is a scan of the little leaflet that came out. There was a map on the back, there was the usual survey, there was have your say, there were some community consultation events. It actually was pretty good. I think some of the words that were put into the final reports may not have, they certainly were said by some people. I'm not sure they were well represented, but the process was pretty good. And they produced this snapshot. Oh, well, that is epically bad, isn't it, that picture? Okay. They produced the town centre planning refresh. All of this is publicly available, of course, and I can send links, and some of it's on the website and so on. I'll just skim the words. This is meant to be a one-picture summary of what came out of the community consultation. Statements of the blinding obvious, like we need to change do better job with height controls in that site. But one of the big changes was they said we need to change the heights here and introduce residential uses. Now, I have gone looking for the data that supports that argument, but all I've found are arguments against it. But that's kind of what was concluded, and that's what's driven where we're going to be in a 2 or 3 PowerPoint slides. They talked about improvements to the pedestrian network as part of the community consultation, better active network, this is walking, improvements in public space, and part of this has happened with the upgrade of the Hibberson Place in some ways. But then to do a lot more work to review the location of community facilities. So there's this fuzzy, we've got to do something more with community facilities here. So this was a major input into the process of doing this refresh of the precinct code. And the refresh of the precinct code has a delightful term called Territory Plan Draft Variation 364. There are a lot of draft variations. Hands up here who's ever read a draft variation of the Territory Plan. Yeah, I don't think a lot of people read them. There's a really important one out at the moment for all of Canberra called Draft Variation 369 that talks about ways in which the tree canopy will be increased in the ACT, at least for privately owned properties. But the one we're talking about tonight is 364, which captures, in theory, the outcomes of the Territory Plan refresh in a new precinct code. And it certainly addresses some of the height concerns. And so there are new height limits for that area where all those high towers are built. So in 75 years, when those buildings get bulldozed, there'll be new height limits that apply. So that horse has well and truly, unfortunately, bolted. We had a whole bunch of other concerns, and I'll go into them in a minute. And we provided them as a written submission, met with territory planners, spoke with the planning minister, and briefed our government MLAs, some of whom have been very responsive and engaging, and others haven't responded yet. So let's go with that. And so I guess the other thing I want to make clear at this point is the GCC is not a bunch of people who get crazy ideas and go off and do stuff. The GCC tries really, really hard to work out what all of Gungahlin wants to do. Now, short of having a quick chat with 80,000 people, that's really hard. But one of the best ways we can do it is through our survey. And so we ran a survey late last year, and I'll acknowledge Kevin Cox for the heavy lifting he did as part of the committee for that. And we asked some very pointed questions, one of which is how much of the remaining open space in the town centre should be used for residential? And if you put the two answers that said no more, together it's 57.7%, which seems like a big number, but it's a very impactful number when you know that 1,496 people answered that question. That's a really big number. That's more than people who are polled nationally to determine which Prime Minister we'd prefer right now. So this is a very high number of all the residents in Gungahlin, and therefore a very strong indication of what the community wants. And so we're following that intent. So much as we might think we have good ideas, we try to make sure they're reflected in what you're telling us. Now, I apologise, it's really hard to summarise a draft variation response in text, but I think it's important that everyone here and everyone online understands we came out fairly strongly in our response. We acknowledged they've done a lot of work to improve height controls, even if it is after the fact, we acknowledge that. But we had some real serious concerns about changes they had made to the precinct code. So the precinct code, the first version, had this very simple first sentence. It just says, town centre, major hub, employment, shopping, social activities, public transport, serving suburbs of Gungahlin. Seemed pretty straightforward to us. In the new version, they've proposed to delete that. So why would you delete that? It just seemed really strange. So we said, you should keep that. I think it's a very good statement of what the purpose of the town centre is. Previously, 100,000 square metres of commercial space, which is a lot, should be retained and not made available to anyone else to attract, to ensure you've got enough space for commercial office space if you are able to attract someone to Gungahlin. That used to be, 20 years ago it was 400,000 square metres, and then it was reached 200,000. Now 100,000, the new precinct code says, let's reduce it to 65,000 square metres. And, oh, by the way, we're going to put a little thing into the precinct code that says a minister can change that allocation just by writing down that they propose to change it. So that's also a strong indication that the government's interest in attracting commercial tenants to Gungahlin isn't great. Now, their current approach has been, look, we'll put out a commercial tenancy, if no one wants it, bad luck. There's a lot of competition for commercial office space in Canberra, in all the other town centres, and because of the airport development, in the airport as well. So we acknowledge that. And in a perfect world, open competition's great. But if you accept the argument that Gungahlin will be a poorer district if it has no or very weak employment, we have less than 6% of all employment in the territory, even though we have 18% of all people. If we don't have employment here, our business community will suffer, and we are going to have a huge commute every day for a large number of people. And it will, it'll affect the vitality of the town centre. So we think the ACT government should look at ways of being a bit more creative and tilting the odds in favour of putting something in Gungahlin. We acknowledge that the ACT government has put their shared services centre out at Wynyard House. We also have to acknowledge that sometimes an act of intervention is required to make things happen, and Zed Selja's initiative to get a small agency out to Gungahlin is an example of that, and we'll see them out here in 2024. But we need to do more in that space. So they're kind of the two headline items, but we're also, you notice I made a point of highlighting, I think I've got this in a map. Sorry. The precinct in the Far East was restricted. You might have, I've made the point, it was that light blue CZ2 colour. So the eastern block was all meant to be office space. All of that's going to be changed now, and all of that is now opened up for mixed residential use. So then instead of minimising how much more residential is occurring in the town centre, they're maximising it. So I understand that the greatest money return the government gets from a block of land is selling it for units. So you can join some dots there. The other thing that happened is the town centre planning refresh did quite a lot of work on open space, amenity, walking and cycling access. And not only is that not addressed in draft variation 364, they've removed the road hierarchy strategy and the walking and cycling strategy from draft variation 364, telling us that it'll be done by someone else, by Roads ACT or by Active Canberra, whereas I think putting it all in one place-based document made a lot of sense. So we say we should put it back. And the last thing is that there's a reservation of remaining of about 3.8 hectares of land for community use in the town centre. What they're proposing is that instead of reserving floor space, that they reserve equivalent floor space. Instead of reserving land, they reserve equivalent floor space in a building for community use. And it's unclear to me how that would be maintained over time, and we've asked the government to explain how that would work. So we're a little bit disappointed with all this, and this all came to a head 2 weeks ago when the Suburban Land Agency, which are the agency that is responsible for selling land after Environment Planning Sustainable Development Directorate have decided what it will be used for. It's actually the Suburban Land Agency that will go and sell it to developers. They announced a whole, in fact, sale of land in 3 town centres, including Gungahlin, and that would be 5 sites. So some of these are in this transition area between, in this case, bush and the town centre, or residential and the town centre. And these are all those 4 sites that I've just pointed at are all CZ5 sites. Not particularly tall, like 3, 4, 5 stories, retail on the bottom, and so on. And that seems like a very fine plan for those sites to us. This site here is a very large site, 1,600 metres, zone CZ1, so still core retail. But all they've come out and said is this site must have 350 dwellings on it. That's the only goal they've set for it, which strikes me for a site right alongside light rail really could have been a little bit more creative than that. So we've, all those people we've mentioned that we're trying to chase up and say, well, please explain, what do you, is this as good as it's going to get? We're going to sell off all these sites along light rail just for units without any opportunity. The other piece here is for every, this is the minimum number of units, maximum, the number of units, the yield that's expected for the site. The government has also identified that there be a number of affordable dwellings in there. So if you go and search for affordable housing, the government requires in a number of developments that a number of dwellings are affordable. Now the dollar limits for affordable are pretty modest, and as a result most of the affordable dwellings are microscopic in size. Kevin and I looked at some plans for some affordable units in a development over in Casey, and I stayed in hotel rooms that are bigger than the units that are being built. So they're very small, but I guess it's important to note that there is some attention to that requirement. So, you know, our position on the sale is, hang on, what are you doing? You just said you want this to just be a standard CZ1 site with 350 units on top. Surely we can do better than that in the middle of the town centre. So, does this mean that the ACT government's giving up on ever trying to build Gungahlin out as a model town centre, just like a Belconnen or a Tuggeranong or a Woden, and just saying, well, look, there's going to be limited employment out here and maybe even limited services, because we still have a lot of other infrastructure, particularly in the area of social support, community services, sporting and recreation facilities particularly, and aged care, that we're miles behind a lot of the other parts of Canberra. And so that's all got to be fitted into the remaining land as well. So this is kind of an overview of where we've got to. Are we on the right track? And how do we move forward? How critical is employment in the town centre? And what's the alternative? If we don't have employment here, maybe we are going to be there aren't going to be jobs in Gungahlin. What's the impact of that? How are we going to build a vibrant community with the right sort of diversity of activities in not only the town centre but Gungahlin as a whole? You know, if that's our lot, how do we design and build and construct and live and work, even if it's remotely, if we don't have, you know, 5,000 seats of employment in the town centre, for example. So I'll leave that as kind of an update on where we're at, and my way I like to have a conversation is to put stuff out there and for people to comment and or critique or suggest an alternative. So this is definitely the Q&A time, and be keen for input from anywhere, including from our colleagues online.
Peter, you said before that you've spoken or you've written to members of Parliament. Which ones have responded and which ones haven't? Can you give us a list?
Oh, sure. So we spoke to Minister Gentleman, who's the Minister of Planning. He acknowledged our submission, didn't really sort of buy into the arguments we'd made, and suggested, oh no, I'm not sure you can interpret that like that. And he wasn't able to suggest what the alternative interpretation would be. But his advisor has taken it on, and that's because it's a consultation. You know, your submission will be taken on in consideration. We've contacted the 3 ACT government MLAs, so Deepak Rajgupta, Michael Pedersen and Suzanne Orr, and Suzanne offered to meet with us and took on our concerns, and we've not heard from her since we met in December. And again, that may be because there's a process ongoing, not sure. Some of the broader issues around facilities and general community services we also raised with Suzanne, and also took up with Minister Berry, who is, as well as being the Deputy Chief Minister, is also the Minister for Sport and Recreation, and we're looking for a response from that Minister. She was hopeful she might speak last month, couldn't make it this month, and might make it in May, so that's hopefully where we'll pick that up. We have a meeting with the Director General of Planning on Friday to sort of ask, well, are you proud of this outcome? Is this what you expect? And is this your intention? Is this the rest of Gungahlin going to be like this? It's just how many units can you fit inside the height envelopes for those locations? And Darren and I have bailed the Chief Minister up on a couple of occasions and said, what are we going to do for employment? Oh, well, open our forces, well, we can't really do anything for you guys because that would be unfair for everyone else. And, it's like, well, it's not like, there are good reasons why the government will do certain things. They've just made available 8 hectares of land in Reed to the University of New South Wales for a peppercorn rent. I think that's a fantastic idea. It's absolutely the right thing to do. But it does mean that's an example of a mechanism to get not just bums on seats, residential spaces, but jobs and vitality into a region. So, there are many levers that can be pulled, and I'm keen for ideas. So we'll continue to pursue those.
G'day, Peter. As you probably know, I've represented a fair bit, especially with the Precinct 2B development there. I guess the question is, how do we break the relationship? There is a relationship, and it's documented in various news sources, between the bureaucracy of the Canberra government, the politicians and developers, with people getting jobs as they move on through the various agencies, and the wealth generation it creates both for the ACT government and for the developers. So there is a bloodthirsty drooling to build apartments and to build residential. And so the question is, how do you break that? And that's at the core. If you can find something that's going to create more income, especially for the government, because the government's going to be starving for income. We're just going through the coronavirus thing now, and also light rail stage 2. What is it? 1.2 billion at the moment. So it's going to be a lot more than that. They've got to find money from somewhere. They're reducing stamp duty, so rates will go up. And if you have more apartments, more dwellings, you get more rates. So, so I think the question for people out there is, how do you break that relationship? Because it's just far too cosy for too many years.
So quite a lot in that one. So as part of all the community councils get together in a group called the Combined Community Councils, and these are common issues. This is not unique to Gungahlin. The Brickworks project had some very unpleasant false starts. The Woden community have been very active in their advocacy around developments in their town centre, and we need to compare notes more. The review of the territory plan has identified a number of problems between the fact that the government will come out with these high-level strategies like the planning strategy 2018, which is this nice high-level vision, and then at the bottom you've got these silly precinct codes and per block rules. And there's just nothing in between. So I've asked questions to ministers. So who's responsible for the overall plan of what land's going to be used in Gungahlin? And everyone's staring at the floor. So seriously, no one knows how things are going to get played out. So in that particular case, individual representations were being made, in this case by sporting bodies, to, can I get a patch of land here? Can I get a patch of land here? Where can I put my tennis facility? How can I get my soccer complex done? And, I was like, well, what's the plan? If you put a soccer complex there, excellent thing. Well, that means that site's no longer available for aged care or community facilities. And so what's the plan? What is the end game for Gungahlin? What are we going to end up with? So, I have some hope that over the next 2 years the territory planning system will improve. But that's not going to fix the situation we have now, with developments continuing to make incremental changes or weaseling around. I'm going to use the criteria to sneak around the rule, and that's going to continue to happen unless communities are active and motivated. The DA for the Curtin Shops development was overturned in 48 hours because 500 representations were made. Right? There are developers in the Molongo Valley who, on a site for 44 blocks, are proposing to put 244 dwellings, are proposing 200 dwellings. And then when a community council goes to take them to the ACAT, the Administration Tribunal, they get caught out on technicalities and politics, and ultimately there's going to be 150 dwellings on those sites. So there's a mismatch in the system right now, and frankly the most powerful vehicle is the people. You look what the Nichols Residents Group did when the owner of the golf course site was proposing residential units there. They were incredibly active and incredibly focused in mobilising large numbers of people, and that required, in their case, a number of people with a lot of time to motivate and coordinate a large number of people. So it's ultimately the answer is in our hands. It's people power. You get if you're looking for who can solve the problem, look in a mirror, right? Everyone needs to have their opinion out there. And look, there are a bunch of people who tell me, don't use the word dormitory. No, more development is good. Let's be crystal clear. Gungahlin will not grow without developers investing and doing stuff. But investors will develop and do stuff inside whatever envelope they're allowed to get away with. And so we need to make sure what we and the community want gets reflected in those rules and how they're applied. So, I feel like I'm talking too much. Any more input? Any more thoughts? Yep, go.
Yeah, good evening, Mr. Orford. My name's Josh. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is my first time here, and I'd just like to raise a number of concerns and issues, if I could, in relation to this. Is there any possibility you could go back to the map of Gungahlin, please?
I can definitely do that, Josh.
Beautiful.
Which
No,
one?
the 3D showing the development application areas.
Doesn't?
No, keep going. Keep going, keep going. Next one's that one
Oh,
right
yep.
there. So I've had a look at the development applications. I'm a little bit concerned, obviously, with
Which
block
ones?
two.
The only ones that are currently open are for the office block just here.
Yeah.
The cinema is going to be here.
Correct.
We're here. The cinema is here, and then there's an office block.
So the concerns I hold are with Block 2, Section 11,
Yep.
Block 2, Section 229, Block 1, Section 12, which are the current cinemas
Yep.
opposite the East Lakes. Now, we currently have car parks on Efkapetus and Hinder Streets, Efkapetus and Gungahlin Place, and Ernest Kavanagh, Cross Gozard, Cross Anthony Rolfe, which are the largest car parks in Gungahlin. You've raised a lot of valid points this evening in relation to the overshadowing and the high rises going up. One of the greatest concerns I have at the moment is that if these development applications go through, the large public car parks that are utilised by light rail commuters will disappear.
Yep.
You currently have over 300 vehicles parking in those two zones, Block 2, Section 11 and Block 2, Section 229. There was a previous car park that was organised in the area that is now going to be the cinemas, but that's obviously been closed down and in-fenced. If we allow development applications to go through for the high-rise, not only will those vehicles be turfed out of that area, but excess vehicles of families living in the residential apartments will also be added to the traffic mix. That will force further people to go and park in the smaller local streets around the area, which will then lead to conflict of people overblocking people's driveways and front yards. I've seen it, I've been in Sydney myself, I've experienced it. Now, the ACT government builds a light rail, yet doesn't appear to have developed or considered any parking for it or the township for full-day parking. Now, the parking area was roughly established on what is now the cinema block, but that's obviously disappeared. A further rough parking area is now utilised by the light rail users on the old light rail road plant plot, which is Block 2, Section 11.
Yep.
The DAs have now been submitted for all those zones, obviously, and the township parking and light rail parking will now be removed if the developments proceed. So let's use some common sense. I mean, I get that Gungahlin is going to increase in development and size. It's going to happen. It's without a doubt going to increase in size. So what are our options? Perhaps the development applications can be moved to the east of the Gungahlin Township, so near Block 4, Section 248, Block 3, Section 248, and that entire area over there, so that a multi-level car parking area could instead be placed around the area of Block 2, Section 11. You need to provide parking for the township, otherwise it will become a vehicle-less township where people are unable to find parking. That will then impact the commercial businesses in the area, and as I said, it will force other vehicles into the local streets, especially at around about the 7:30 to 7:45 mark, when all of the all-day parking is now filling up.
So part of the challenge, yes, you're right. I do have, I'm not sure if it's a draft or it's the actual document that talks about exactly this issue from planning, who say, yeah, we're aware that this is going to have an impact, the sale of these sites is going to have an impact on parking, and this is the plan. So I'll dig that out and make sure it can be published to make it available.
Well, strategically, you've also got to look at the fact that people may now not choose to move to the Gungahlin district area because they know that parking is going to be a nightmare.
So there's the other part of this is that I'm not convinced that all of the planning processes always listen to all the other parts of government. So there is meant to be a park and ride facility constructed at the corner of Wells Station Road down over here. There's a plan to put a car park in between Wells Station Road and the Mitchell facility. I don't know when that's due to come, but that's actually, as ideas go, not bad. You can't have it too much further south, because once you get in your car and go much further south, you'll just keep going and not bother to catch light rail. So the other problem with having all of the park and ride here is that it's a lot of traffic coming in, and so the spreading it is part of it. So it's a good point, and it's clearly something that needs to be included. I do know in the lease requirement for this block, 211, there's a requirement for 200 plus, I can't remember the number, public car spaces. So in addition to whatever they have to provide for 350 dwellings, there has to be 200 and I forget what the number is, but it's all in the sales documentation, it's all there.
Well, could not the residential developments be pushed to the east further? And if necessary, I know you mentioned before that there are no developments that will be undertaken in the grasslands south of the Gungahlin Township, but if you're going to place large-scale apartments, then perhaps that needs to occur. I know that there are environmental considerations, but you need to push them to the outer areas of the actual township itself to allow commercial, residential developments to occur to develop the township itself.
If it was me, I would have said, go nuts on the southern edge. Okay, there'll be a little bit of overshadowing of the grasslands, a different, for an hour a day, but really that would have been a good outcome. But really we've had to design with a model and a whole bunch of expectations, some of which are legacies of when this area was meant to be developed. 30 years ago, the plan was to develop this, right? And then it was like, oh crikey, we've got to watch out for the environmental issues, and so they were appropriately reserved. But no one's gone back and said, well, what's the opportunity that creates in terms of redoing the town centre? One of the expectations we had is that because there's this high-rise residential piece here, that would change the way in which you'd lay out the town centre and maybe provide a nice boulevard to walk down or some cycle access, something to recognise that that's occurred, but that clearly hasn't. Well, sorry, it hasn't been captured in draft variation 364, but they're good points.
Well, I'm sure I have the concern about the parking, and I have no doubt that that's reflected by a large scale of the majority who commutes every morning. What's the point in putting a light rail all the way into Gungahlin if you don't provide adequate parking for the commuters going into the city each day? Otherwise, everyone will just go and park out past Flemington Road.
There's no major cycling centre to ride your bike into the town centre and jump on the light rail either.
As I said, by 7:45 every morning, all the other car parks around Gungahlin are completely full.
Only if you grab a microphone. Well, you can borrow mine if you really want.
One of them is that we've brought this up with Transport Canberra, and Transport Canberra, the top people from Transport Canberra have mentioned to us that, in no uncertain terms, that the days of open air car parks are numbered.
Which I understand, and
I know, but that's what
they want to make a profit as well.
Well, that's what they basically said to us. So we have actually brought up what you were saying, that fact. The other thing too is that the parking has been exacerbated by the light rail. So
of course,
the light rail, when it came in, the people that own the shopping centres automatically introduced the limit on your parking, because they didn't want people to be parking all day in their car parks. So that's actually forced them to introduce paid parking as well. So that's kind of added that aspect to it. The other thing that I want to add is that this land is due for auction relatively soon. So that's in 2 weeks' time. So what we're really aiming for is for this process to be stopped.
So what does it take for this to be stopped, and can approaches be made to the government to say, well, this is a legitimate concern of the Gungahlin Township in that there are, or will be, no further parking unless Block 2, Section 11, for example, or other blocks close to the vicinity of the light rail are actually utilised for a multi-storey car park, for example. Now, I'll speak on behalf of myself. I don't want to pay for parking, but I know it's going to be something that will be implemented in Gungahlin eventually. It's going to come.
And one of the things that we have asked Transport Canberra a number of times is to be very specific about where the permanent locations for parking will be, because up until not long ago, those current car parking spaces were temporary. So there was no guarantee, if you will, that they would actually be used for parking in the future. So,
well, I'm sure that there are many people who commute into the city each day who also don't want to pay for parking. However, if it was to occur, then I'm sure that most people wouldn't mind spending a couple of bucks on parking because the light rail, if it's maintained at a decent value each day, wouldn't be excessive in cost. So even if something was constructed to that effect in order to look after the residents of Gungahlin, and this is what this is all about. If we allow this to occur, then we're not being looked after.
So this is a really good point, right? So this is back to this point that one of the few sources of discretionary revenue for the ACT government is selling land. So they're highly motivated to maximise the return from land. They're going to get more, a greater return from selling land for units than they do for building a parking station. So, you know, a requirement in a valuable block of land like the one we're just looking at, Section 2.9, to include an amount of public spacing is a way of balancing that, I guess. I guess the challenge is how do we make sure that over the period of development, not only is there sufficient parking based on converting grade level, you know, on dirt parking into in-building parking, but it actually, the total volume of parking increases. However, that all said, in theory, we're meant to be using more of public transport. Now, this kind of goes back to my point around if everyone in Gungahlin, or a very large percentage of people in Gungahlin, are all going somewhere else for work, then maybe we're going to have to build a second light rail line or get some of those human-carrying drones they're planning to trial them. I don't know what the answer is, but clearly we're going to have a unique situation where we're trying to move as many people as live in Tuggeranong, you know, into Canberra or to Belco, and you know, and let's do an analysis of where the people are going. And we have some of the data to do that ourselves. But
if you push the residential apartments to the outskirts of the actual township itself, then you can put all the commercial residences inside the actual town centre. That will increase your commerce and trade naturally, thereby increasing the number of employable positions within the Gungahlin area. That's a solution straight away. I mean, that's town planning 1.1.
Well, that's if you buy the argument that we can get away with nothing but residential in the town centre. And if we do that, we just have to have a really, really efficient way of moving people other than cars necessarily.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's a good point. Yep.
I'm a recent arrival in this part of the world. My name is Dennis. I'm really disappointed to hear the shenanigans that are going on in other parts, and commend you for the energy with which you're trying to steer things in a better direction. Cheers. I really didn't think that I was coming to what would become a dormitory suburb. I'm very disappointed about that, and I understand that I've heard rumours that there may be some department coming in here, and now tonight it sounds rather bleak on that front. So how to motivate the people though? How can we get this? This is an election year, I think.
It is definitely an election year.
How can we motivate more of our people to be aware of that this is the scenario that's potentially in line for us?
Dennis, that's a great question. We've, you know, those of us been involved in the community council for 5, 10, some cases 20 years, trying to work out how to get individuals motivated, because most people are humans and they react to what's happening to them right now, right here. So when you say, oh, it's something in the town centre, that's not in their street, and it's in the next 5 to 10 years, the urgency goes away until the bulldozers move in and 20-storey buildings start emerging. So getting people engaged, you know, we're still working that out as we go along, but part of it is leveraging our digital tools well, getting people along to these sort of events. But obviously, you know, we've got a dozen people here and 4 or 5 more dozen online. It's always hard trying to get those people. And, you know, most of the community councils in Canberra, well, all the community councils in Canberra are volunteers, and people fit it into their spare time. And, you know, that's a flawed system, because you know, you're kind of relying on those people who've got the time to put in the effort. But you know, I think it matters. Right? It frustrates me when, you know, examples like, well, why didn't we put all those high-rise buildings right in the middle of the town centre, and then, you know, that would have been much better. Well, that's not how the land was released. So there's the whole land release program is part of what drives these behaviours. But of course, the demand, the desire from the government to make sure they get good return on the land means that they tend to spread the sale of land out over time to avoid everyone buying blocks of land and end up competing with each other. There's all these dynamics that occur. You know, why won't another government agency move out here? Well, because the secretary wants to have their department close to Parliament House, and the staff want to be where there's really good parking, or, you know, all of those factors. Or I can get a good deal from the Snow Brothers out of the airport, or whatever it is. There's a lot of factors in doing this. So, you know, the government announced their intention to work with the federal government. The ACT government announced their intention to work with the federal government on a smart work centre, so you can work some of the time from Gungahlin. We haven't seen any result of that initiative in the current term. So, you know, these are the sort of things we've got to try and surface. And yeah, in the only time you get full attention of all the MLAs is during an election year. So this is it. This is it.
Just, Peter, you mentioned people from previous suburbs or other suburbs that mounted successful challenges to some of the DAs that have been put in. So maybe it's worth sitting down and just having a look at the strategy that they employed. I mean, I've got a position, I think general Australian attitude is pretty, she'll be right, mate, it's a bit apathetic.
Yep.
And then there might also be a lot of cultural points where people aren't used to challenging authority or challenging government, and so they don't like to stir trouble. But I think we need to take a bit of a leaf out of Hong Kong residents and actually stir the pot a bit. So there might be lessons learned from those other community councils on how they generate. I mean, I remember I tried letter drops and everything to get people to put more objections into those DAs, and obviously people didn't get motivated enough to do that. But also there might be a lesson from, you mentioned the Snow Brothers or Terry Snow's development. Now, he made a lot of money off building car parks and putting an attraction next to a car park, like an airport. So surely there may be something like that where you have a multi-storey car park, but there are businesses attached, or there's a business building attached that is a substantial enough development that may attract business there.
Yeah. I don't have the solution. Best we can hope for is raise the issues and create forums where people can bring ideas together. But my sense is that we can do better than we're doing now, and that's kind of the goal. Your microphone to the back.
Just if I can take on, was it Josh?
Yeah.
In CZ2, on the corner of Flemington Road and Manning Clark, you have a tram stop.
Yep.
I cannot for the life of me understand why an area there isn't put aside for a decent car park for park and ride or whatever. It's ideal, and you would take some of the traffic from the town centre. Now, my wife Elizabeth and I often will catch the tram, because we're retired, into the city, and we go off-peak because it's not as busy. But I think that would have been, you can see where I mean, the Manning Clark and Flemington Road.
Manning Clark's over here.
Yeah, it's marked CZ2, you mentioned. Yeah, so we've got a tram stop there.
Oh, yeah. They're just...
right there, there's a tram stop. Yeah. Now, that area where, just below that red dot, that's all vacant land, marked CZ2.
All of this is vacant except for that community housing development there.
That, to me, that's a temporary measure. You could easily put a
So this is the current plan from EPSDD that I got earlier, late
well, you mentioned
February.
mixed
and
use.
These are the blocks they're planning to flog off. That's obviously a car park right now. This one's just closed because of the cinema development, like we were saying. So what they're saying is there's parking in all these other places to go. But I know there's a DA for Coles, and they're reducing time-based parking to avoid people coming in there. I see, in the middle of the working week, the Bunnings car park is chockers because there's people who've parked to hike over to the light rail. So it doesn't seem to. It seems like to me the government or Transport Canberra didn't plan for the possibility that the light rail would be an enormous success. And so they've got all these problems. Like, crikey, everyone's trying to get on, and so they need to get their act together to improve this infrastructure. And at the moment, a lot of this, it's not quite as simple as saying these spots are there, because, talking to Phil Knapstad, the Vinter Group runs the marketplace. They're actively trying to prevent all-day parkers in their car spots. So saying here's your available parking is not a helpful suggestion. This is not a piece of GCC material. So, from EPSTD. Yeah, there we go. Now, by the way, you must adhere to parking conditions apply in these car parks. So, yeah, I haven't given them feedback on this, but I think if they use this publicly, most people will just get angry.
Well, most of those car parks are now timed car parks.
Yeah. So it's not going to. Yep, we're getting close. So Darren has the mic.
I just got a quick point to make, and one of them is the reason why the Gungahlin Community Council put in this development application objection is because I think the council is well aware of the fact that often what happens is the development applications go out asking for your submissions whether you like it or not, and if they don't get submissions from the public that say they don't like it, they just automatically assume that you're entirely in favour of it. And we believe that this is what's happened with the high-rise developments is that after those high-rises were built, the reason why we talked to the ACT government and asked for this planning refresh is because the Gungahlin Community Council had a lot of people who were upset with the fact that it was built because it's not what they want. So one of the things that I guess going forward is that, and I'll take this from, this is actually the same document, is that it says here residential development is prohibited. This provision was put in place in response to significant community desire for more employment in the town centre in 2010. So the community wanted this zoning put in place because they wanted more employment in the town centre in 2010. And we've now conducted the survey and your opinion hasn't changed. It's the same. You know, you do not want residential apartments to be in the town centre. So the good thing is that because we've put a submission in on your behalf, you're able to sort of jump on the back of that and have your say, rather than this go ahead and be built, and then for people afterwards to then say, "Gee, this is not what we want. We wanted more business or so forth in the town centre." The problem is we've only got 2 weeks until this land goes to auction, and after this land goes to auction, it'll be done and dusted. So this is the reason why I guess the Gungahlin Community Council is appealing to you for your support to be able to push what you want. This is what you want. You know, the survey said that you don't want residential apartments. And what we're asking the government to do is to be more democratic about this and do what's in the interests of the Gungahlin people rather than what's in the interests of maybe what developers might want.
So we'll get Kevin up and then Josh again. But just a reminder, this is the last of the CZ1 sites. So strictly it is a retail core site. But it's these ones that are the office park that has the potential to be lost. But the other element of this is there is a land release program that was announced in the budget last year. And you can find it, and it'll actually say which blocks are coming up for sale when over the next 3 to 4 years. So you know, it's all happening kind of right now in many ways. Kevin.
Yeah, as it's an election year, it does seem to be an opportunity for us to try and get behind a candidate or candidates that might like to do something about this. Perhaps there are. I don't hold much hope for the current parties, but perhaps there's some independents who've got the energy and so forth to be able to campaign on this sort of thing.
Well, at any given instant, so what the community needs probably is something of a position around. Well, these are the things the community wants. You know, how are the candidates? What are they going to do to address those concerns?
Yeah,
I think that's pretty key. Exactly how that plays out. It's been obvious at the risk of sliding into politics. It's obvious that if you've got an outright majority, you tend to get one set of behaviours, but if you get a minority government which has to work in partnership, you tend to get different behaviours, because you get a more balanced view as opposed to one party. So, that's a complicated conversation. It's hard to determine the outcome of that in the ACT electoral system as well.
But we have seen the fact that one person in in the Assembly can actually control the balance of power.
Yep.
And this is a great opportunity for an independent candidate who wants to look after Gungahlin to come forward and do something.
There's the electoral system is the electoral system, but I think the challenge is being clear about community expectations. So that's one of the things that was good about the Gold Creek Homestead project is we had some concerns about the way that sale was going through 18 months ago. We flagged them with the Suburban Land Agency. They took it off the market. Then they engaged in an excellent process to find out what the community expectations for that site was, and that expectation is now going to be fed into the sale process. Whereas there is no, well, actually, the sales document includes the Town Centre Planning Refresh Report, but there's nothing that links that report to any requirement of a lease or, I don't quite know what it's there for. But anyway, yeah, Josh, you had another one.
Sorry, so just a very quick one. Has the window closed for submissions objecting to these developments?
So the
especially for those watching at home.
Okay, so sorry, skip forward. I know it's very annoying. Draft variation 364 submissions in response to that have closed. So that's a planning document. It's 60 pages of heights and building envelopes and all sorts of stuff. Submissions that have closed. The only DAs, that I know are currently active are the one for the office block just getting control here. I don't think there are any other developments in the town centre actually active. So when someone wants, there's a difference between sale of the land and then someone will sit on the land for ages. So this site here, the one I mentioned before, is the only one that's not built on. The developer that owns that has owned it for over 10 years. And so I don't know what's going to happen. But the other challenge with the proposed changes is they're in effect now. They're actually in interim effect already. And so developers who've now got a ceiling height on them from the new changes are very, very unhappy.
So, right.
So our submission's in. You can go and look at our submission. It's on our website. The other way, of course, is if tens of thousands of Gungahlin residents started bombarding all of the candidates in the Yerrabi electorate, that would focus the mind of those candidates.
So that's essentially the only course of action available to the general public now to oppose the CZ2 on Hinder and Flemington roads areas?
Visit the Have Your Say website all the time. Have your say. Put your feedback in. Be involved. I mean, I have not time in my life to look at every one, the ACT government's consultations on Have Your Say, let alone all the other ones that come around the edges. Like, I didn't know the cemeteries group were having a consultation on what they're doing, but it's not on Have Your Say, but it's really interesting.
Thanks very much.
There's hundreds of these. So it's very hard to be an active citizen. I appreciate that, but it's worthwhile. Yep. Last couple of things.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it's... So it is a bit of effort to put in a representation against a DA. So would it be effective if there was a community council representation and it had signatures attached to it?
No.
That doesn't work?
The way it has traditionally worked best in the ACT is if someone, well, that's how you get the numbers. Now, what works best is if you customise the bits that mean the most to you, but the process doesn't go by sheer weight of numbers. I know that the evaluators, if they see 100 responses that are all the same, they'll go, oh yeah, that's just all the same, I'll count that as one, which is inappropriate. But
I guess the other point addresses your concern is, I think the reason why there's so many cars in Gungahlin is single-use park and ride. But that's a direct result of when light rail was implemented and the government changed all the bus routes. And there wasn't sufficient design in feeder buses or feeder transport that gets people from suburbs into the town centre, or maybe there is bus park and ride and that still takes people into the town centre.
I think there's an interesting conversation there. I actually think in Gungahlin particularly, the number of people who get in a car and drive straight to work is not that big. I think the number of people who get in a car, take their kids to school or drop them off a childcare and then drive to work, I think that's a really big number. I actually don't know that. Probably should have asked that in the survey. But, because that's the demographic. people tend to take their kids to school now, and once, yeah, well, you're a problem, right? So, and once you're in your car, you know what? Bugger it, I might as well stay in my car. And right, and you've got to pick them up after school anyway. So so maybe it would make sense to have a car park and a childcare centre all together, because that's kind of the flow. I don't know, but these are the sort of things I'd like to see some creative endeavour around, rather than just going, you know what? Well, God, rather than just get control of bloody quicker. Rather than just saying, let's put 350 units there. It's like, well, maybe we want something else. And look, maybe there's an opportunity in some of these other sites to do some of that. But it's
well, there you go. That's a Terry Snow initiative. It's multi-storey car park with a multi-storey childcare centre.
Have conversations with your friends, get them involved. It seems like, I feel like this has been really positive, and it's like, yeah, in the right direction, going in the right, and keep paddling hard. And so, we'll keep going out there and paddling hard. And I'm at a time in my life where I've got some time to put into this, and I think we can make a difference. But I tell you, nothing counts more than a truckload of people. One loud mouth, good. 1,000 loud mouths, unstoppable.
So, a Gungahlin community protest march, right?
I don't want anyone to be wearing a mask, Hong Kong style or coronavirus style, but you don't need that in this year. In this year, these are the things that matter to us in Gungahlin, and these will drive our votes. So ultimately, that is the ultimate way you provide feedback to any elected government. That's just the way life is. You've just got to be clear about what your ask is. It's hard. Yep.
I'm on the Your Say site. I get asked, and I went to a couple of Sunday mornings ago, Places and Spaces. Mm-hmm. Oh, did you do the gun? Yes, it was interesting. I'm awaiting the response from them.
Sorry to interrupt. Is this the one run by Environment Planning Sustainable Development around the Territory Plan Review? Yep.
Yeah, it had lots of letters. That sounds exactly like it.
There's always lots of stuff.
Yeah, but it was very interesting to hear from people who were there. We were just in the Gungahlin session. Mm-hmm. Someone raised lack of sporting facilities because she's organising soccer games, and she said there aren't enough fields around in Gungahlin. And another person said, well, what about teenagers? There's going to be an awful lot of them soon. What are we doing for them?
So there's several things there that are important. Addressing our demographic is pretty difficult. Getting connected with the teenage community to find out what their collective needs are. I have no idea. I don't have an Instagram or a TikTok account, and I can't dance, so I don't want to put myself on TikTok. But how we get a view of from that space is very difficult. It's great to know that you're involved in the community and you're involved in those elements. And honestly, your feedback on that sort of stuff would be great, because all I got was a little 3-pager from EPSDD saying the people in Gungahlin, as well as being on board with the things people in Canberra like footpaths and walking tracks, sport and rec facilities, open and green space, parkland and close to nature reserves. Everyone in Canberra says that. In Gungahlin, the extra things, they said, we like the light rail and nature reserves. There's knowing that you're involved in those groups and giving us some feedback on how well they work and getting your message out is really super useful. So, drop us a note, send us a Facebook thing, or send us an email, and just to let us know. That'd be great. Just to know that there are other people out there who care is pretty impressive. So. All right, it's late. I'll hang around for a bit longer. We've got a couple of other things going on with cycling I want to pick you up on. Again, if this is a topic of interest, we can do more on it. Ian Bushnell from the Riot Act spoke to me yesterday. I noticed there's an article being published today. I haven't looked at it yet on this topic. Share it, look at it online, contribute, get a dialogue running. We may yet have some more stuff on the radio. I've done a couple of talks on radio as well, so we'll see how we go. Thanks very much. Yep, stop.
We'll just quickly, want to also raise another point here. We've got some notes as part of the Gungahlin Town Centre refresh process. Other government departments were asked to feed into it as well, and one of them, the Suburban Land Authority, the land custodian here, asked for. They said that we support a strong employment base in the district of Gungahlin. Provides for a range of employment within the town centre. The SLA are interested to understand what commercial and retail studies have been undertaken that would show a change to the Gungahlin town centre operating as a commercial and retail hub over the next 20 years that would water down this provision. They asked to see what are they basing this watering down on, and the answer was not very good, not really an answer. There have been some minor changes to the desired planning outcomes in the proposed Gungahlin Precinct Code. This is to reflect the historical trend of commercial office supply in the town centre, in line with the revised target of office floor space proposed by the Gungahlin Planning Refresh. So they said, we based that on some historical trends and what we think might happen.
But nothing's been sold before, so we assume nothing's going to be sold in the future, and so therefore we're going to reduce our goals to meet nothing.
So internally within government, SLA asked, what are you basing this on? Where are your studies? Where are your evidence? And they said, this is just kind of the way it seems like it's going. So yeah, there's when there's questions like that being asked and not really answered within government as well, it's definitely it's falling to us to ask these questions.
All right. Again, thank you very much. I feel emboldened to go out and cause more trouble. Thanks very much. See you next week. Next month. What's your email address?